And what happens is in today's market, the average dial to connect rate is about 5%. I take a list from Zoom Info, I pull it down, I dial through it, make 100 dials, talk to 5 people. If I score it through the phone ready leads platform and I just call the ones that I say are picker uppers or phone ready leads, your connect rate is going to go from 5% to 25%. Or said differently, reps are now able to have a conversation every 3 to 5 dials versus every 20 to 50 dials.
Welcome to the B2B Playbook. We built this channel for small B2B marketing teams who want to drive more revenue for their business. Every week, we're showing you how to create more demand for your brand step by step using our 5Bs framework. So if you're time poor, resource strapped, but you still want to make a big impact on your business, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below so you don't miss an episode. Welcome back to the B2B Playbook. Listeners, as you know, we rarely have guests on our show. Instead, we select a few true experts who align with our view that B2B marketing and sales is more about people, not platforms. Today, our special guest is Ryan Reisert. Ryan is an outbound sales coach and go-to-market consultant at Reisert Consulting. He's the author of the book Outbound Sales, No Fluff, which ranked in the top 100 best sales books of all time. He built and sold phone-ready leads. He's an absolute master of the sales world. I'm sure you would have heard of him before. And to be honest, I think he's clearly a pretty great marketer too. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Ryan, I was familiar with your name, but once my good friend Adam Mandarovich told me to have a good look at you, it's then that I realized that you're actually that rare combination of a cold-blooded hunter when it comes to sales, and you have a real knack for marketing too. So I want to get into both sides today to hear a little bit more from your perspective about how they work together. To give our audience a little bit more context on your own origin story, before we get into phone-ready leads, could you please give us a bit of background as to how you were able to get that insight to build out the Outbound Sales No Fluff podcast and book? And after all, it's completely foundational to anyone that knows anything about using phones as a channel.
Yeah, absolutely. Started my sales career, I think a lot of people do, which is funny because it's not a common path, right? You don't wake up one day and say, I want to be a salesperson. You stumble into sales. And so I actually studied math and engineering in college with the intention of being a teacher, and then somehow stumbled into sales. In high school, I did some telemarketing, like real old school telemarketing, doing political and consumer surveys, basically. The 45-minute calls, you have to call the old people and like keep them on the phone and complete surveys. And I was pretty good at that. So when I got out of school, I went back home. I graduated in 2008, right in the middle of the last kind of crazy financial time in our world, the 2008 financial crisis. And I grew up in a pretty rough area. Most of my friends were either on drugs or in jail. We were going out. This is between when I graduated and I was supposed to be doing my student teaching. We'd go out to the bars and there's getting into fights and things like that. And I was like, I'm not going to make it here. I had some friends from college that were doing internships in San Francisco. And so I went out to San Francisco one weekend, and like I was coming out of the BART station off the airline, and when I got up, the rest of the world, it's burning. Like it's the financial crisis, and you're hearing that we're all never going to make any money. And right off the BART, first of all, I've never seen skyscrapers before. And San Francisco isn't that big of a city as compared to New York, but it's still, you see the city, you're pretty amazed. But there's like a Ferrari parked at a meter. There's the worst car I saw driving by was like Porsches and really nice cars. Immediately, I was like, I think I need to be here. And so I didn't do my student teaching, went back home, packed up all my stuff that I could in my parents' 86 Toyota 4Runner, drove to San Francisco and started looking for work. And of course, during bad times or good times, which you learn as a salesperson, everyone always needs salespeople. So I started taking interviews for sales jobs. Thought I could polish up my resume and use the telemarketing skills as a way to break in. Quickly learned that it was not that easy because everyone wants experience, but stumbled into sales and the rest is history. That's how I got into it. In terms of merging the marketing and sales background, the first company I sold for was actually a consumer home finance product, which hindsight's 2020, probably a bad job to take in the middle of a financial crisis. But I got the job. This company was backed by AIG. And about 6 weeks into that role, our entire team got called into an office and we all got laid off because if you remember back in those times, the government actually pulled money from all these investments some of these people were making when they were bailing out the banks. AIG was one of them. We were one of their investments. Done overnight. So I was like, what the hell am I going to do? It took me forever to get this job. But I learned CRM. I had a sales leader that was giving me a reference. And literally within a week, I had 3 job offers for another job. And I stumbled into a really early stage bootstrap company that was doing pay per click advertising. I didn't know what that was. I thought it was spam as a user back then. What are these ads things and no one clicks into them? But I quickly realized that marketing is just math. And then as I was selling that product, I also learned that sales is just math. And that's what really jump started my evolution towards all the things I talk about in Outbound Sales No Fluff and the backtrack of what phone rate leads is all about is really sales is marketing is sales. And at the end of the day, we're trying to solve an equation, target, message, channel, timing. And so once I clicked that stuff into place, I was off to the races. So the first 10 years of my career, I worked in mostly ad tech, MarTech companies. So pay per click, SEO, CRO. We did a lot of channel stuff with big retailers and brands. And as a seller, I'm selling marketing solutions. So I really understood the game of sales and marketing and how they work well together.
I appreciate that background and that context. That's really helpful to understand then what put you in the position to build out Outbound Sales No Fluff, but then also for you to build and eventually sell phone ready leads. Do you
Mhm.
mind if we speak about that a little bit and just where first of all, for those who don't know, what is phone ready leads and where did that idea come from?
Yeah, absolutely. Throughout my sales career, the phone has always been and still is the most effective channel for getting conversations started. Again, going back to the equation, target message channel timing. In B2B sales, specifically, when you look at the advertising background where you can build audiences and then send ads to them, B2B is the same thing, except you have a cheat code because it's one to one marketing at scale, right? So I can get the exact companies, I could get the exact people, I could get their contact information. And then it's all about trying to figure out what channel I can reach them. And over the years, I've always tried multi channel outreach, but the phone has always been the most effective way to get a conversation started, right? So sales starts with conversations and you move it forward from there. And so, because of that, the number one problem with the phone is that no one picks up the phone. At least that's what people think, right? You have to make a bunch of dials before you get somebody on the phone. But over the years, I guess it's my math brain, I discovered that the phone has a lot of really interesting data points that you can leverage that allows you to understand who you should be calling and who you shouldn't be calling. And so over the years, and if you read the book Outbound Sales No Fluff, I created this process. I call it buckets. In sales, as I was learning everything I could, reading every book you possibly can, you learn great sales methodologies from the time I can get you across the table, right? We sit down, we have an appointment. That's where everyone thinks sales starts. You're going from lead gen to sales. I get a lead, I get them into a meeting, and you can go. There's so many different methodologies to learn how to take a lead from we're across the table, we're going to do discovery and qualification and demonstration proposal and win a deal, but nobody really thought about what do you do to get that meeting, right? The age old principle is you get a list, you get a meeting. But what I discovered is like you could create stage definitions and exit criteria at the top of the funnel that allows you to operationalize your time and where you're actually getting those conversations and moving people along. So buckets is my process for defining clear stage definitions and exit criteria at the top of the funnel. Inside of buckets, there's 4 stages: uncontacted, working, priority, and scheduled. So scheduled is what everyone is after, and most people just take an uncontacted lead and they try to schedule them. But by creating these stage definitions and exit criteria, you start to learn a bunch about, am I spending time with the right people? And as you start to use these buckets, you'll also start to get insights. So one of the first things I learned is that people who pick up the phone tend to pick up the phone, right? So that somebody who's picked up the phone I had a conversation with in the past, this is considered a priority lead. And what I learned is I have to make 100 back then I have to make 100 dials to talk to 10 people to book one meeting. That was my math, right? I always knew that. It's like if I can get 100 people, make 100 dials against that list, I'll talk to 10 of them, I'll book one meeting. But what I discovered is that if I got the people I talked to in the past that I didn't book a one meeting with and I just called them, I could connect at a better rate than 10%. I could connect at a rate of 100 dials to that list would be like 40 conversations, right? So people who tend to pick up, people who don't. And then I started to look into that a little bit more and started to learn a bunch about how the phones work. I still didn't crack the code on that just yet, but I had a process that I would call validation. So when I get a list, I call them for the first time. I want to try to figure out if the contact information I have for the person in the first place is correct. To take an uncontacted lead to a working lead, I need to call through the list. I need to figure out if I can get to them. That's my goal for a conversation, or I need to get to a working voicemail. If I can't get to a working voicemail, that's probably not a number worth calling. A lot of reps spend a bunch of time trying to break through gatekeepers and all this other stuff. So just by hacking my list in that way in the first place is if I don't get to a working voicemail, don't call it anymore, my connect rates were going up. Then I just started to discover that people who program their voicemails, right? They leave a personalized voicemail and I hear it's their name. That's what I would call a validated lead versus people who don't. It's just like a generic voicemail grading. People who are validated are more likely to pick up than people who don't. So now all of a sudden I'm segmenting my list and focusing on people who are validated first and not calling the rest. My connect rates go up. So that was my early evolution. After I finished my sales career, I worked for a very early stage startup that was acquired by Sprinkler, which in the marketing world was a unicorn at the time. It's now a public company. I discovered that so many companies were really challenged at getting their inside sales reps productive. They're finding them, getting them into these new tech stacks and like figuring out how to make them productive. I was like, why? Like every team I've ever built has been able to scale and there's an outcome. Why are they struggling? And there was a report on LinkedIn that said that the three fastest growing sales roles in all of LinkedIn land were engineers, data scientists, and sales development reps. And I said, it's interesting because at the time, there was a boot camp for developers, a company called Dev Bootcamp. There was a boot camp for data scientists, at least in the Bay Area, was this company called Galvanize. But I hadn't seen anything for sales. So after I finished the acquisition and got through my bonus that they were going to get me by hitting some milestones, I started a company called Inside Sales Bootcamp. And at Inside Sales Bootcamp, my goal was to try to create a program that would teach people how to use the phone and these other tools really effectively. But I had been out of the like in the roles because I've been in some VDP sales roles for a while. I hadn't been like in there grinding every day. So I stumbled across this fact that people are struggling to get people on the phone. And there was more data than ever. There was all these automation tools, but there was a company called Connect and Sell that I found through somebody that does this thing called parallel dialing. And so what it does is it takes a list and it will call 10 people at the same time. So instead of me sitting there and have to make 10 dials to get to that one conversation, it does 10 and it's like a conversation after conversation. So I started using that technology, combined that with outreach, and we were doing calls and emails at scale, just spamming the TAM. And I used that company to scale the Inside Sales Bootcamp to teach people how to cold call, like lots of conversations faster. And then I sold the bootcamp, went into some consulting, wrote Outbound Sales No Fluff, talked about my process and how I was using it in these technologies to make people efficient. And once I wrote the book, I had a bunch of people come out to me saying, "Hey, how do I put this bucket process into my technology?" So I ended up creating another business. It was called the Sales Developers that kind of flipped the script. The 90-day boot camps were for reps to get jobs in tech and learn how to cold call. The Sales Developers originally was a 90-day boot camp for founders. Integrate your tech stack, build a playbook, run it for you, and then the idea would be pass it off with these other people that I just sold this other company for to feed the market. Still using Connect and Sell. And I discovered something at that time. Again, people who pick up the phone tend to pick up the phone, but there was more data coming out of all these calls. And I was working with Connect and Sell very closely to publish data and talk about the success of phone. But I discovered that there was a lot more to a list and what it takes to get somebody on the phone. And the power of dialing a list through Connect and Sell is not having 10 people call at the same time. It's really the data of all that validation I was doing before. And so Connect and Sell had some, they call them agent dispositions, meaning when I'm on the phone and I'm calling, I could actually look in the back end what the agents that were calling were saying happened on the call. And so I could speed up the validation process without me having to do it myself, like I used to do in buckets. And so I try to work with Connect and Sell to build this, saying, hey, the power of your tool is not the parallel dialing, which has issues. There's a pause, a beep, a delay. Reps don't like it. They don't know who to talk to. I was like, there's a better way to do this. Use the tool without a human on it to validate lists, and then just take the ones that pick up and put them in front of people. And what I showed by doing this, I was hacking the system a little bit on the back end, is my customers were doing about 80% less dials and having about a 37% increase in their meeting to conversion rates. Better conversations, more conversations, et cetera, without having to do dials. Well, Connect to Sell sales dials. And so when I got to the CEO, liked the idea, the senior leadership, not so much. And they're like, we're not going to cut off 80% of our revenue overnight because they sell literally by the dial, not seats. We'll change your model, right? There's lots of different ways you do it. Long story short, they didn't want to do it. So I left and I built phone ready leads, which essentially is buckets. I explain it as it's a Disneyland fast pass to buckets. So if you read the book and you understand the process of moving leads from uncontacted to working, there's this validation process that needs to happen. And for about 3 years before I sold the business, I learned even more. We've scored millions and millions of phone records. And there's a bunch of little insights that you can capture from a dial that helps me predict who picks up and who doesn't. So that's how it all came together. To explain what it is, you can think of phone ready leads as like a predictive algorithm, or as the marketers in here, lead scoring or intent data, right? I have a list of accounts that I want to sell into. Wouldn't it be great to know which ones are more likely to buy first, right? So that's what intent data does. Lead scoring. I have a list, a bunch of inbounds. Wouldn't it be great to know which ones are more active and interested in what we're doing based on their behaviors? Great. That's lead scoring. Phone ready leads is lead scoring for phone numbers that predicts on a list who's most likely to pick up and who's not. So when you sit down and call, you just focus on the ones that are most likely to pick up. And what happens is in today's market, the average dial to connect rate is about 5%. I take a list from Zoom Info, I pull it down, I dial through it, make 100 dials, talk to 5 people. If I score it through the phone ready leads platform and I just call the ones that I say are picker uppers or phone ready leads, your connect rate is going to go from 5% to 25%. Or said differently, reps are now able to have a conversation every 3 to 5 dials versus every 20 to 50 dials.
Wow, that's an enormous improvement. And I see you like always posting the stats on your own LinkedIn as well of the before and after to show the difference. It clearly does make a huge impact. So it is all about trying to make the most of that salesperson's time, trying to book that meeting for the least amount possible. Is that right?
The idea is, and we'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later, is the goal of having a salesperson in a seat is to have conversations with your market, right? At the end of the day, you have a seller on a list of accounts and contacts that you want to do business with. Their job isn't to be clicking buttons and doing activities. Their job is to be talking with your market, right? If you take it to simple principles, I've just for 15 years been hyper focused on trying to say, hey, how can I create systems and processes so that my sales reps are in as many conversations as possible with the least amount of effort to get there, right? So nothing happens. It doesn't matter how many dials you make, emails you send, all that stuff doesn't matter unless you're having conversations with your market. That's where the rubber meets the road to begin the sales journey. But when it comes to cold calling and all the stuff at the top of the funnel, I still consider this marketing, right? I kind of brand this as shifting the mindset from lead gen, which is what most people do. They call to book a meeting, to demand gen, which is you're calling and you're trying to activate your market. So when you're calling, your goal isn't just to have conversations to book meetings. Your goal is to have conversations to get to completions, meaning you're on my list. You're somebody I want to try to sell to. I don't know yet, but I want you to know generally what we do and why I'm calling you. And then the outcome could be a yes, but it could also be a no. It could be a not me. It could be a not now. And I'm categorizing those into buckets for future follow ups based on that interaction. And so the whole point of buckets is I want to be spending my time on activities that are closest to revenue first. And then I'm going to work those backwards.
Yeah, I love that approach. And something that we haven't really spoken about, it's very prevalent in marketing, and we're trying to get leaders to wrap their heads around it, is the time lag effect of like you communicate with a potential customer and the research shows it might actually take 6 to 12 months, possibly even way longer for them to come back around. Is that the case with outbound sales as well? Someone you had a conversation with 6 to 12 months ago might not have been in market, but you have that conversation with them and now they finally are, and then they come back to you. Is that something that happens?
Yeah, 100%. Again, outbound sales is just marketing, and we're trying to solve that target, message, channel, timing. That's the problem. Most people believe that you can somehow magically take a list, call them, and you're going to get these incredible results, but timing is everything. And so the majority of your outcomes are going to be no's, not me's, right? Not now's. And if you categorize those properly and you shift away from trying to force meetings down people's throats when the time's not right, and you move to more an educational based marketing approach, right? Then you're going to have more long term success. And what you're learning at the top of the funnel is, again, do I have the right people? Am I saying the right things? And am I in the right channel? One, where I can reach them. That's where the conversations start. But then two, where they're receptive. And so that's what we're really after, is trying to build our buckets to understand what channels can I reach my audience, where they're receptive to my message, and how do I solve for that timing thing. And so when you move into this concept of completions, you're really thinking like a marketer, like a demand gen person, where I'm up funnel and you've got your marketing funnel, which is like awareness, consideration, evaluation, decision. Then you have buckets, and those align nicely: uncontacted, working, priority, scheduled. And the reality is, it's very difficult to take an uncontacted lead into scheduled out the gate unless you're in their buying window. And if the listeners have ever read the book, The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes, which I highly recommend, he has this concept called the buyer's pyramid, right? And he outlines in any given market how many people are buying now, how many people are open to it, how many people are not thinking about it, how many people don't think they're interested, and how many people know they're not interested, right? So it's 3% buying now, 7% open to it, 30% not thinking about it, 30% don't think they're interested, 30% know they're not interested. You flip that, that's a funnel, okay? And most of the time, 60% of your market who doesn't think they're interested and knows they're not interested, you're not going to get them into a sales meeting now, but you certainly could start to try to begin education-based marketing. And then the red ocean is that 10%. If you're calling, you can expect, back in the day, just like my math said, I talked to 10 people. Theoretically, I should get one in, because that's 10%, right? The ones that are buying now, the ones that are open to it. But where the real winning zone is, and that's a red ocean because they're probably already considering other people, et cetera. But the winning zone is the not thinking about it. So there's 30% that are not thinking about it. And so if you're skilled on the scale, you might be able to get those in the meetings. A lot of times it's still not the right time. And so that's where I'm talking about activating your market. And then the rest of it is nurturing, right? It's just starting the process, getting them to become aware so that when the window's right, you can know what channel to reach them, where they're receptive, and get on top of them at the right time for follow up.
Yeah, I love that. That's really, I feel that's well aligned to how we think about it, is that anytime we communicate with someone, like we can do it on a one-to-many, one-to-few, one-to-one basis. I feel like marketing's very good at that one-to-many, one-to-few basis. Sales is very good at that one-to-one, but the messages should generally be the same. It's just that the timing and understanding where that particular prospect is at their point in time dictates the message that you send them. But if they're much early on in their journey, if marketing's able to send them helpful content, why shouldn't sales be able to talk to that? So I feel like when you're talking about doing outbound, the people who are doing that outbound, do they have that ability to be a lot more consultative as well if that person isn't necessarily ready to go ahead and book that meeting?
You hope you're training your reps that way. Most aren't, right? Most are getting someone on the phone, verbal diarrhea, some sort of pitch, and then the majority of the time they're getting hung up on and saying, I'm not interested, don't call me anymore, whatever. That's what everyone feels like cold calling is all about. But with the right messaging framework and mindset around, I'm seeking a completion. Some of those completions are meetings, yes, now, but majority of them are not. And so when you have the right messaging framework for an outbound rep that can learn how to master interruptive communication, which is what cold calling is all about, you take a much larger portion of your audience, which is hyper targeted one to one, even when they're up top, and you get them into your demand gen funnel so that you can start to nurture them. One of the most powerful things that they're starting to see this more and more on the market. I don't know what the name of his R2 something B something is, like he's popular on LinkedIn. That technology has existed for years. I think it's called Lead Finder back in the day, etc., where you can reverse IP people who have visited your site and say, hey, if I'm not capturing it from a lead form, I see that this company's on my site. That's been around for, again, I've been in the marketing space and I sold at Sprinkler. We had an audience product. So that kind of technology has been around for a long time. Most sales organizations don't understand that concept, but I've been tracking this stuff for a long time, and just getting somebody on the phone, a majority of them, you can, if you do the right messaging framework, hey, this is Ryan, not expected my call. I was hoping you could help me out for a minute. Again, this is Ryan. I'm calling from company. Immediately, you'll start hearing them typing on their keyboard. What are they doing? They're going to your website, right? All of a sudden, I took a one-to-one digital advertising unit, me as a seller, and got them to my website, right? They might not send out a lead form and stuff like that, but if you have modern marketing technology enabled on your website, you're going to capture that cookie, or you're using IP addresses to say, hey, this looks like somebody's in our box, and they're now in your funnel. You're going to do retargeting and all these other things. And it's absolutely if you train your reps the right way. I think of the SDR role as a one-to-one advertising unit. Whether I focus on the phone, I don't really believe in some of those other channels because they're not efficient for getting my rep into conversation. But there is efficiency to using those other channels for the purposes of what are we trying to do? If I can't get you into a conversation, I want you to get you into my digital funnel. I want you in the dark funnel, reviewing all my social content and all this other stuff on YouTube or whatever, or I want you on my website, learning about who we are and what we do. Even if I can't have that conversation yet, I'm trying to get you into that awareness phase. So you're aware of us. And if we have good modern marketing in place, marketing is going to do its thing, right? And sales is going to do its thing with buckets. And we're going to try to meet them when timing's right. And that's going to get us in a position to capture a much larger chunk of our market.
With that attitude, marketing and sales can clearly exist so well together and complement each other. I suppose that is why I think you're a pretty great marketer yourself. Do you find that the conversations are easier to have when you do have that strong marketing presence yourself?
Oh, outbound is extremely difficult if you don't have an organization that believes in marketing as well. I think they go hand in hand. And the majority of the work you're doing in outbound is marketing. It's telemarketing. It's email marketing, cold emails, email marketing, right? So if they don't understand the concepts around having a digital presence, especially in the modern era, it becomes so difficult. One of the first startup that I was at, the pay-per-click company, I had so many calls where we were targeting the internet retailer top 100, like big advertisers back in the day. And our minimum like ad spend for a customer to use our platform was like $50,000 a month. So it's not SMBs, right? These are bigger companies. Now that's a drop in the pan because people spend a lot more on digital. But back then, pay-per-click was still only like maybe $15 billion market. And so I remember getting on calls and saying, we're from eSearch Vision. It's like eSearch who? And they're doing the search, the same thing everyone still does because these are digital marketers we're trying to sell to, SEM managers, digital managers, etc. No, if you guys are so good, why are you not even doing your own pay-per-click? We weren't doing our own pay-per-click and we were a pay-per-click company. And so that's where I really started to understand the companies that I want to work for as a seller. If I want to be successful, they have to believe in marketing to support sales. And that's just the digital presence side of things, not to mention all the other content and the education-based marketing. Most sales trainers are like, the request for information is bullshit. It's a waste of time. Don't send them stuff. Like if they don't want the meeting, just fuck them. And it's no, some of those are like, you have to be smart. Don't just like, if it's an immediate brush off before you even said anything, but there are people that are not ready, but are potentially interested. You did a good job of hooking them on the problem or the future problem they might have, and they want some information. And so how much can we enable our sellers with content and resources that can educate the buyer so that when they're ready to buy, we're known as that person. We're the expert that's going to help them solve the problem. Both us as the seller, how do we enable ourselves with great content to be a consultant, a solutions, they look at us as an expert, but more importantly, our company. What resources are we providing that are not just product, right? It's not just product, it's problem, where's the market going? Here's trends, here's insights, here's reports that are not all about buy my shit. It's about, hey, there's a problem and you should be thinking about it in this way.
So I guess that enables you to genuinely be helpful to keep building that bridge of trust that you need for someone to take a chance on you when they finally do come into market. And just anecdotally, the difference in meetings that we have when someone knows of our brand versus when they don't, like that call goes so differently.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure it happens to you, right? Like you speak to someone who has listened to your podcast, read your book, they love you. They're just so excited to be talking to you right now, and they're already bought in on like the vision that you're selling. Whereas someone who comes in a little colder, there's, even though they've booked that meeting themselves, there's some element of skepticism. But that's when having that helpful material, showing that you can be consultative, showing that you can be helpful, and you're not just there to try and take their money, just builds a lot of trust.
100%. My little tagline is, and solve a problem or go away. And even when you're calling, when I'm training reps, I help them understand that they need to try to become that person. And that person is, think about your own way of buying stuff. Everyone's a little bit different, but for the most part, how do we try to solve a problem? I have an issue. The first thing I'm going to do is, if I can't figure it out myself, I'll go to YouTube. I'll try to, like these days, I'll go to YouTube, watch a video, try to fix it. If I can't fix it myself, then I look to my inner circle, trust, like you said. Who do I know who could solve this problem? Do I have someone in my family? Do I have a friend that does this? I'm going to reach out to them first. And then I start going out in my circles. So how do you become that person around that problem that come up for the product or services that you're offering, that you become the go-to person that they think through as they go through that trust factor. And so having somebody that's not just educated on your product or service that you're selling with this intention of just, hey, buy my shit, but more so like I'm educated on the general problem in this market. And even if you came to me and you started to talk about a problem, if it's not me, I know somebody, right? So how do you start to educate yourself on the market in general and really the audience that you're selling to, the jobs that they're responsible for getting done? You probably solve one of them, right? You probably solve one of them with your product or service, or maybe a couple. But the reality is, every individual has multiple other jobs and priorities that they're trying to solve for that are somewhat related to the thing that you're doing. Giving the example of, let's say, even the most recent thing, phone rate leads, right? I'm trying to solve the connect rate problem, right? The technical problem. The business problem is revenue, right? They're not getting enough revenue. The CAC's out of whack, so on and so forth. The technical problem is they're not getting enough connects, right? And that could be solved by using a dialer, so on and so forth. So I have a solution which is going to solve your connect rate problem, but there's other issues around that, right? That could be your data vendor, right? So I go become an expert on all the data vendors and I can make recommendations based on all the different industries and segments on who you might want to consider as the best data vendor. Or maybe you need you need an email tool, right? Like I become an expert on sequencers, even though it's not something I do, but I still know all the tools and I can make recommendations. So becoming that expert, the expert, not just on what you do, but everything else around it. When someone says, hey, I need to go fix my revenue problem, I have a specific problem. I can fix your getting more of your reps in the phone, making them better on the phone, but there's other elements around that. And so when you talk to me, not only am I going to help you get a path towards solving this problem, but I'm also going to discover what's the biggest constraint right now for you to get to revenue faster. And if it's not me right now, I'm going to recommend you to something else first before you come to me. And just having that consultation and mindset around, oh, wow, Ryan didn't sell to me just because there was an opportunity to sell to me. He consulted on what I should solve for first and in the right orders, and had 3 or 4 recommendations on things that I speeding up the process. When they finally get to the point when they're ready to really solve the problem, who do you think they're going to probably go to first?
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to play that game, I suppose that comes down to how you're measured and how leadership views all of this. So I'm sure you do a lot of work with them in setting up those structures too. Brian, I wanted to go into something else that my friend Adam Manderovich always talks about, which is the concept of cataloging the market. And I think others call it surveying. And the focus here, instead of booking the meeting, is to try and understand key information about the prospect, like who their current provider is, what they love and hate about their current provider, when their contract is up, looking for permission to circle back. So just like we have a lot of information about that person, is that something that you have done in the past, that surveying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about moving away from lead gen to demand gen and this concept of a completion. There's a really great book by Jeb Blunt called Fanatical Prospecting. And he talks about cold calling has really 4 main objectives: gathering information, building awareness, setting a meeting, and moving a deal forward. That's the 4 main things that you can use the phone for. Most organizations are just using the phone in a lead gen moment to try to book meetings. But if you go up to those other 2, they're way more important, right? Gathering information and building awareness are actually, it's the same concept of categorizing or cataloging or surveying if you want to. And if you think about the completions concept, which is I'm trying to reach you, I'm giving you an idea of what we're all about. But if the timing's off, it's one of these other areas, then the whole goal is to try to capture all this information. Do I have in the right person in the first place? Is this a problem that you actually care about or not? Are you trying to solve this problem? Are you aware of the problem? Are you aware of us? And then all these other things, right? So that is the general concept of a completion. And there's a couple different ways that you can accomplish that. I think what Adam's talking about doing is literally saying, I don't even want a meeting to be a part of my objective. My first objective is literally just to get the information, which is fine. I've run campaigns like that before, like literally running surveys. And that can be an incredible strategy. But at the end of the day, the goal of the conversation, the objective of the conversation from a cold call can be in any of those 4 categories. And so, generally speaking, if you have SDRs, you're going to still try to get meetings when they're appropriate. But the idea is if you can't get the meeting and it doesn't even make sense to get the meeting, then certainly make sure you're getting these other things checked. Is this the right person? When do they care about this? What tools are they using? Who are they who have they worked with in the past? Are they in a contract? Do they have an annual review cycle? What other priorities do they have? These are basic sales skills that every rep misses because they're so focused on, you want a meeting or not? No, bye. And that information and awareness function and the completion is so important so that you're actually activating your marketing so that when's the appropriate time for follow up, and you're armed with information to move from a more generic persona based message to something that's much more specific to their use case. So capturing that information and knowing who they use and when their renewal dates are up, etc., doesn't only feed when I should get back in front of them to try to sell to them. It should also be informing marketing, right? People now call this account based sales. Again, this is all just sales to me. It's, I now know more about you, so I should market to you in a better way, more personalized. You're moving from one to many to one based on the specific issues or priorities that they have. And the more information you can capture through conversations, the better you can get at using every channel to activate them and make sure you're in front of them when it's time to buy.
So it sounds like really the whole thing is we need to move from a quantity to a quality approach, or really get that quality first, from the list that you're dialing to the information you have to making sure that the connect rate is as high as possible to having quality conversations. And then, as you said, thinking about it as like marketing and sales working together, being able to have quality conversations and move through to completion. So I imagine there's quite a range of SDRs in terms of like capability and talents, that some are just like on that, as you said, like that, just try and connect, power dial, book a meeting at all costs. And then there's the other end, which is where you and your team are really at and trying to train up others to be.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, again, target, message, channel, timing. And then if you think about the things that we're doing, list, message, rep, those are our three levers we can pull. And the process is pretty straightforward. You start with accounts from a hypothesis perspective, right? Go map your account ICP. I call it a swim lane. Who are all the companies that look like companies that we can serve? They look like people that have problems that we can solve. Companies first, you target companies, you sell the people. Once you have the company list, then you move to the people list. Now, who, every single role within that organization that touches the technical problem that we're solving and gets promoted or gets fired based on the business problem, who are all those people, right? Then you get the contact information for all those people. Every phone number you can find, every email you can find, all the social channels you can find. Then, so we got the list, you get the contact information. Then you want to validate the channel of which you can reach them. So you're trying to work through marketing, which is outbound and digital, other marketing. Where can we reach them? Can we get them on the phone? Do they respond to emails? Are they active on social? Okay, checking. That's all information we're capturing. Then we want to figure out who's receptive in those channels. Okay, so we make the list of accounts, we get the contacts, we get the contact information, we figure out what channel we can reach them, we figure out channels where they're receptive, and then it's just all about the follow up. So you make a list, you know what to say, you call the list, you follow up, or you work the list. Now, for me, I talk about calling because, again, calling is still going to get you more reaches on any given list than any other channel for the purposes of salespeople. But you could be emailing, running ads, doing whatever you need, all the channels you have to try to activate them into your funnel.
I love it, Ron. That's music to my ears. And I think it's probably music to a lot of our listeners' ears too. For those who are listening, with the B2B marketers, whether they're salespeople, whether they're leadership, and they would love to get you and your team involved to try and give them a hand with this, where's the best place for them to follow you and find you?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Yeah. And then if you want to reach out to me, my number is 415-994-0110. Call me. So LinkedIn or my phone is the best two channels. If you email me, I'm very slow to reply because I don't check my email often outside of like active sales stuff. But if that's your preferred channel and you put in the subject line, let's talk, Ryan, I'll get you. So it's Ryan@reisertconsulting.com.
Fantastic. Ryan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This is a great conversation. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.